John Fetterman went on Real Time with Bill Maher, and yeah, it was as insufferable as you would expect it to be. But there's some interesting tidbits in there that I do want to talk about, because on one hand, Fetterman admits that he's no longer progressive, yet he still implies that he is progressive, and really he didn't leave the left left him, and that's why he no longer identifies with progressives. But at the same time, he also says that he's not progressive anymore because his near-death experience made him come to the realization that he should be more honest about his actual thoughts, which happen to be significantly more conservative. So he's all over the place here, but I do love that he's basically confirming that he became more conservative after getting brain damage, literally, because that explains so much. But I do want to talk about that part first, because it starts with Bill Maher commending him for being honest and pointing out how politicians usually aren't this open about their true beliefs until they retire. But Bill Maher asks him whether or not his near-death experience gave him the courage that he needed to be more open and honest about his true beliefs. And this was his response. Quote, "Absolutely," Fetterman responded. "There's a line from the first Batman. Joker's like, I've been dead once already. It's very liberating. It's freeing in a way. And I just think after beating all of that, I just really want to be able to say the things that I have to really believe in and not be afraid of if there's any kind of blowback." Maher then asked him to explain what he meant when he stated last year, "I'm not a progressive, I'm just a regular Democrat," and now he separates himself from progressivism. Quote, "I didn't leave the label. It left me on that," Fetterman said. Sure, we've never heard that one before, John. But notice how he's not willing to pick a lane here. He's saying that he didn't leave the left and the left left him, but at the same time, his near-death experience freed him and allowed him to speak more candidly about his conservative views. Look, I genuinely think that his brain is too cooked to notice that he's contradicting himself here. But this is a grift as old as time itself, right? It's what everyone says when they leave the left and shift to the right. For example, just this week, City and State New York magazine featured a quote from Richie Torres where he says, "I didn't leave the progressive movement left me." And then it says that he's not afraid to stand alone, as if supporting Israel's genocide is some unique position in government. But I just think it's funny that he thinks anyone believed he was progressive in the first place. But I mean, the point is, we've seen this again and again and again. The left has consistently opposed settler colonialism and genocide, but yet we have these opportunistic, grifting politicians coming along, bankrolled by the Israel lobby, saying, no, the left actually changed. They used to be pro-settler colonialism and genocide, and now that they've changed and they don't support Israel, I don't support them. No, you've changed. Millions of people in the progressive movement haven't suddenly changed. Just admit that you changed. I don't understand why they have to pretend like they haven't changed. I don't know if it's cognitive dissonance and they don't want to admit that they haven't been consistent or that they've been bought off. I don't know what it is, but I hate that they pretend like they haven't changed when it's obvious that they changed, right? But when it comes to Fetterman, he also flipped on the issue of immigration, but yet he's still blaming the left for his shift. Isn't that amazing? These people blame the left for everything because they just can't be honest about themselves that they've shifted. They were bought off. I mean, look, I'm not going to agree with you if you change, but you don't have to pretend like you didn't change. Like, there's nothing wrong inherently so about changing your political position. It happens all the time, but your position is getting worse and you're still blaming the left and you're saying, no, I've always been the same. Why don't you just admit that you changed? I guess I don't understand that, right? Now, what struck me is how Fetterman said that his near-death experience freed him in a way, so that way he's more inclined to be honest now about his true beliefs. And listen, I have no doubt that having a near-death experience is going to affect somebody in a profound way. It's going to get you to look at things differently, view life in a different way, but it somehow made Fetterman a worse person. That's what's crazy to me, right? Because think about it. If you nearly die, you are hit with the harsh reality that existence is ephemeral, right? So nearly losing his life, in theory, should get him to value life more, be more empathetic, get him to acknowledge the inherent preciousness of life and support life for all people. But instead, he takes the opposite approach. He comes away from that experience with the opposite view of life. And he's now one of the loudest cheerleaders for Israel's genocide and thinks that they should be able to slaughter as many Palestinians as they want to with impunity. It's the opposite conclusion anyone of sound mind would come to after having a near-death experience, but that's the key here because he's not of sound mind. He suffered a stroke and brain damage as a result, and he hasn't been the same since, and everyone can see it. Now, that's because when you experience damage to your brain's prefrontal cortex, your cognitive flexibility becomes diminished, and you literally become less curious and open-minded. In fact, there's actually a correlation between brain damage and religious fundamentalism, but I'm not an expert. However, him explaining his pivot by pointing to his stroke that gave him brain damage does make a lot of sense. But it's entirely possible that his near-death experience did free him in a sense. And I say this because, Bill Maher, he's come to the same conclusions as John Fetterman, and you can't chalk up Bill Maher's stupidity to brain damage, right? But they're going to go on in this next clip here that we're going to watch to explain why they think the left is so off base in their refusal to support Israel's genocide. And these reasons that they cite is why it's antithetical to leftism to not support Israel here.
Really, after it happened on October 7th, I really knew that that whole progressive stack would be blasted apart, and there's not going to be any kind of way how the Democrats are going to be able to reply to that kind of, or respond to that kind of. And I really decided early on that I believed that was going to be the right side with Israel throughout all of that. And I knew that would going to be Democrats would continue to peel away and kind of walk away from standing with Israel on that. But that's where I decided after.
How do you explain that, if you can, that the people who consider themselves the most liberal have abandoned Israel, which was always a liberal darling, for the people who terrorist organization, the people who outwardly say they want a genocide, who outwardly are the one side of this who's against the two-state solution. Somehow they wound up with them. Why do you think that is? And will this split the Democratic Party?
Well, it does because there's an appeal there, and I think you talk about that. Like last week, you really hit with the gender apartheid.
Yes.
And talking about a lot of these issues, and some of the most progressive and left parts of the Democratic Party are standing, for the kind of side that have kinds of organizations like Hamas or these kind of nations that there are no rights for women, and they certainly don't embrace the LGBTQ kinds of lifestyle. And then even in Philadelphia, the Queers for Palestine blocked the Pride parade in Philadelphia, and I never saw that on the bingo card, but it's really true.
Well, Queers for Palestine showed up to a pride march in Philadelphia, so I guess we're all going to have to support genocide now. They got us. We're backed into a corner. Brilliant logic. I think that they're trying to use that as evidence that Israel critics are anti-gay and illiberal, when in actuality, Queers for Palestine in Philadelphia is one group. It's one small group of queers trying to get other queers to join the movement for a free Palestine. And to be clear, queer criticism of pride is not a new phenomenon. Queer people have spoken out against the commercialization of pride and rainbow capitalism for a very long time now. And this is seemingly an effort by leftist queers to get fellow queers to reject efforts by politicians to pinkwash genocide. That means not letting genocide-supporting politicians show up to Pride, for example. But with that being said, I don't know what the protesters' main goal was there, but I don't care. I just despise this notion that queer people who support Palestine are doing so against their own self-interest because Palestinians are homophobic. How about you don't use us to justify the genocide that you're supporting? Because Alabamians are pretty homophobic, but that doesn't mean that I support the mass starvation and slaughter of people in Alabama. But that's where the disconnect here is coming from, seemingly, right? Since Israel is a liberal darling, as Bill Maher described it, we're supposed to automatically applaud everything that they do since our values theoretically align more with them, and thus they must be doing what they're doing in the name of said values. But that's stupid, and I reject that. And that logic right there is what leads to the justification of very terrible things. The Iraq War, the Vietnam War, other atrocities, right? The left isn't critical of Israel because we reject liberal values and support Hamas's religious fundamentalism. We're critical of Israel because they're doing a genocide. That's it. You don't have to look further than that for an explanation. Genocide bad. Period. Full stop. I'm never going to rationalize a literal genocide because the country doing said genocide has more egalitarian laws when it comes to women and LGBTQ plus rights. I'm fundamentally opposed to genocide because genocide is bad inherently so. Therefore, the values of the victims are irrelevant to me. You're not going to entice me into supporting genocide by saying, hey, what if I told you Israel is pro-gay? I'm not going to be like, oh, really? Well, I guess they can do this genocide now. That's irrelevant to me. I don't care about that. I care about the actions of what they're doing, right? You can't convince me that this genocide is just because they're taking on barbarians when they're the ones acting like fucking barbarians, right? We're not inherently good because we come from the West. People are people. And I respect human rights, which is why I am against this genocide. Now, Bill Maher is still criticizing Hamas for rejecting a two-state solution when Benjamin Netanyahu recently just said he opposes a two-state solution. So I honestly don't know if Bill Maher is dumb or ignorant, but he just doesn't care because he's supporting Israel by default. So any and everything that Israel does is good no matter what because they're the good guys and the good guys can't do wrong. Good guys are taking on the bad guys. That's as much as I need to know. Now, the same is true for Fetterman. He is basically using the same logic, but he also admitted that he staked out a position in the beginning, right? After October 7th, he said he's going to ride with Israel, and even though their actions are indefensible, he chose a team, and he's going to ride or die with that team no matter what. But I should be more clear. He didn't really make the choice to support Israel because it's kind of the default position for all politicians, given the influence that the Israel lobby has. But ironically, Fetterman took a dig at one of his colleagues for doing the bidding of a foreign government after taking bribes. But you're going to know the irony here, but just watch.
But more people seem more concerned about me wearing a hoodie on the floor, as opposed to we have senators taking bribes and being, foreign agents and everything like that.
Now, he's, of course, referring to Bob Menendez, who was indicted for allegedly doing the bidding of Egypt after taking bribes from them in the form of gold bars and a luxury Mercedes-Benz. But, I mean, Fetterman isn't in the best position to be making this critique. Because as AIPAC Tracker points out, he has literally accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Israel lobby himself and is currently using his power to do political favors for them as a U.S. senator in the form of advocacy and policy. Now, sure, Fetterman didn't technically break the law, but I mean, do you think that those campaign contributions from the Israel lobby had no effect on him? They're still bribes. They may not be, bribes in the form of gold bars, but they're still bribes regardless because the money that he took from this foreign government's lobby turned him into an agent of a foreign government just like Menendez. He's just as loyal as Menendez, but yet he thinks that he's different than Menendez somehow. I mean, the only difference here really is that Menendez took illegal bribes and Fetterman took legal bribes. But a bribe is still a bribe, and since the Supreme Court legalized bribery, politicians can effectively do what Menendez did if they just limit the kind of bribes they take to campaign contributions. My point is, Fetterman should have some more self-awareness if he's going to call out the corruption of other senators, because he's really no different. But in conclusion, whether it's due to brain damage or corruption, John Fetterman is wrong for supporting genocide, and I don't care why he supports genocide. The fact that he supports genocide is immoral and disgusting, and politicians like him need to be shamed for all of eternity for cheerleading on one of the worst atrocities our generation has witnessed.
Ideas. Recovery mode, my brain ideas. Recovery mode, my brain ideas.